So another warm welcome to everyone. Welcome to this issue of our meetup, Content Design and UX Writing. We are located in Bern and Zurich, but or at least the hosts, us three hosts are. And today the speaker is also from Zurich, so that's a bit special for us. But I think we have an audience from around the world, so that's very, very cool. Lovely to have you all here. FYI, we are volunteer run, so we do depend on sponsors and individual supporters to make these events happen. If you enjoy our events and you would like to buy us a virtual coffee, we'd be more than happy to receive your virtual coffee. Lara and Tam are dropping a link to a Ko-Fi page, which you can also find on our website, by the way. Yes. FYI. And on another note, if you are a speaker, if you have anything interesting to talk about when it comes to the world of UX writing and or content design, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to come up with a talk together. We're also happy to sit down together and figure something out. All right. Today, like I said, is very special for us because we've got a speaker from Zurich here, our original meetup location, Daniel. Daniel is a software dev gone UX writer, and he'll be going on a mild rant today, talking about the problem with writing is that everybody thinks they can do it. I feel like as a writer, we can all kind of, relate with this statement. So I'm really excited for today's topic. Just one last thing before I hand it over to you, Daniel. In case you guys are missing the networking part of our events, because we're virtual, we do have like a quick speed networking event at the very end of this meetup, where we send you out into breakout rooms and you can turn on your camera and maybe get to know some other UX writing or content design enthusiasts around the world. So feel free to stay after this talk if you'd like to meet some people. What did I forget? I'm sure I forgot something. Yes. One last thing. All right. If you guys have questions, Tam, Lara, and I will be monitoring the chat. So feel free to use the chat functionality for any questions you may have. We'll just gather them and then we'll throw them at you, Daniel, at the very end of the talk.
That's perfect.
Amazing. All right. So I will hand it over to you now. Welcome, Daniel, to our, I'm not even sure, 20th edition. Let's say 20th edition of our meetup. Thanks.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Welcome, everyone, to this mild rant. Join me as we rant. We rant and rave together about the trials and tribulations of being a writer. Actually, I wanted to ask before we even start, are we all writers here? Is there a hand-raising functionality in Miro? Can we raise hands? I'm sure there is, right? Are we mostly writers? Are we partially mostly writers? Probably, right?
I'm seeing a lot of nodding. I'm seeing a lot of hands. Okay. So thumbs up. I feel like more or less it's a yes.
Excellent. I'm also a writer. I'm a decent writer. I've got some game. I've been doing this a while. And I wanted to talk about this thing that's been bothering me for a little while as I've moved, especially as I've moved into UX writing. But yeah, before we begin, that's just because not everybody has all the Miro experience. Miro lets us do this in a very interactive way, and so there's a few just Miro basics, right? So on the left side of your screen, you should see this right here. You'll see that you can create a note or a comment. You're welcome to create a note, leave a comment anytime, anywhere on this board. Feel free. There'll be lots of interesting stuff to talk about, and we're going to be talking about frustrating experiences, so we can all, we all have a lot of those to share, I think. Life as a writer. You should see your little control bar at the bottom there. You can follow me. That's the easiest, right? Just follow me and I'll guide you through this wide area of Miro extravaganza. And you can throw up an emoji when you are excited or otherwise. There's lots of different choices down there, right? When I blow your mind, you can give me a wow, et cetera, et cetera. feel free anytime. Or if you want to go a little old school, you can copy and paste these emojis here and just throw them down there because, you know, everybody rolls a little different. So those are the basics of Miro, but as long as you are following me, you can just sit back and relax. All right, yes, 2 thumbs up, exactly, that's the spirit. So let me introduce myself. That's me in the middle, obviously. I am a writer. I started off as a copywriter. I started off as a software developer many, many years ago, but I didn't really like that very much. And writing was what I was good at. So I switched to writing. I discovered advertising. I became a copywriter, worked for agencies in Europe, Jung van Matt, for example. And then I became a freelancer for a while, and I slowly but surely transitioned into UX writing. So I've had a lot of experience writing for different people, for different companies in different areas. And at the moment I work at UBS as a UX writer, which is of course a very big and corporate environment. And it's been very quiet there the past few days. Not really. Anyway, we don't have to talk about that. But so I'm a writer, and that's my beautiful wife on the left. She is also a writer. She's also a UX writer, as a matter of fact. We started out as copywriters together. And that's where we met at Jung van Matt. It was love at Jung van Matt. And now we are having this wonderful daughter, Serafina. And she might be a writer, possible future writer, no pressure. She likes a lot of things like ballet and kung fu, but you know, writing is probably in the genes. So we're gonna push her to do that anyway, but you know, it's gonna be great. So we're a house full of writers, and like any good content creator, I'm gonna start with a story, right? So speaking of houses, we bought an apartment here in Zurich, and as you can see, it needed some renovation, right? It may be fuzzy in your view, but I can point out a few items here. Like, for example, there's no floor in this apartment because there was a little bit of flooding while it was empty, so they had to rip out the floors. And it needs new paint because it hasn't been painted since the 80s. And it has these very old school windows with the Coke bottle style bottoms. You know, it was nice in 1979, but things have moved on. So we bought this apartment and we had to do a lot of renovation to it. This is a true story, by the way. I didn't just make this up. It's a true story. I'm in this apartment right now. So, okay, what does that mean? Thank you. What does that mean? That meant that we had to meet a lot of craftspeople, right? Carpenters, electricians, plumbers, kitchen specialists, painters. And, you know, it's this period of time where like all these different experts are coming to the house to fix things, replace things, build things, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, as we go along this 6 to 9 month project, we give a lot of feedback, right? But of course, we were respectful, right? Because we're creatives, right? We know how it goes when you build stuff, right? We would say things like, well, this doesn't look quite right to me. What do you think, right? Because you're the expert, Mr. Plumber Man or Miss Electrician. Is this correct? Just let me know, right? Or you would say like, shouldn't this be over there? Like, you know, I'm just interested, like we thought it was gonna be here. Maybe we misunderstood, right? We try to be friendly about it. Or this doesn't look like it did in the picture, right? Because you know you want to just be curious, like, did I see the wrong picture? What's going on here? And throughout this entire experience, not once did we say anything like, that's not right. Hand me that screwdriver and I'll show you how it's done. Or I went ahead and repainted this room. Can you touch it up now? Or perhaps I redid everything that you did last week, Mr. Electrician, and now it's not working. So can you fix it? And not once did we say, actually, I don't think it matters what you think. I don't think it matters what nails you use. You know, I don't think you actually know that, right? But as writers, we get this kind of crap all the time. And that's why I wanted to talk about this, because it seems to me that the problem with writing is that everybody thinks that they can do it. Thank you. That's really helpful because, you know, in this day and age when we're all on mute, like you can't hear the laughter in the audience. So thank you. So yeah, everybody thinks that they can write. And that's a bit of a problem for us as writers, like the real professional writers. All right, so let's dive in over here. So this is the question that I pose given the story that I just told, right? Why does every other professional craftsperson, and that's what we are, right? We are craftspeople. Why do they just get to do their thing and not be bothered, right? Why is it that the writers have to suffer this so much? Well, there's a couple of reasons that I've thought about and I wanted to share with you, right? So one of them is our super duper low barrier to entry, right? It's really easy to use the tools of writing. For example, I was a freelancer for like 15 years and I like a very simple, very fast, very easy setup, right? So I used TextEdit, which if you have a Mac, you have on your Mac. And it's a completely reduced text editor, right? There isn't even pages, right? It's just one long thing of text. You can do bold and italic and underline and plain, and you can change the fonts and stuff. And it's fantastic. It is literally 2.3 megabytes, not gigabytes, on disk, right? It's in free with every Mac. There's no features. There's no learning curve. It is completely fast and adequate. But it just goes to show you that there's no barrier to entry to become a writer. Anybody can open up TextEdit and start typing and say, look at this, I wrote something, right? So that's very different than, for example, a designer, right? So they have Figma, or back in the day, it was Photoshop, right? And these are impossible apps to figure out, or they have a huge ramp, right? A huge ramp to figure out what's going on and how to actually create something. Figma, keep in mind, I'm a software guy. I grew up in the Silicon Valley. I've been on Macs my entire life. Figma is the only app I've ever used where just by clicking one thing, I can screw something up. I don't know how that's possible. I've had to ask my designers, like, I'm sorry, I don't know what the hell I did, but I think I messed something up. So, undo, undo, undo. Anyway, designers have this huge barrier to entry. And I think that's it's like people talk about like a walled garden. They have these walls around their work, right? Because not anybody can just dive into Photoshop or Figma and start being effective, but anybody can write in TextEdit or Word. Okay, so another reason that I think this happens to writers is because it's really easy to spot bad design, and it can be very difficult to spot bad writing, right? I mean, you have to actually read it and think about it in order to judge it. Whereas design, I think it's much easier to just step back and take a glance, right? So I have an example here. If you Google bad design, of course, you get lots of millions of examples, many, many examples. Let me zoom in a little bit. So here's an eBay page, right? eBay online auctions. So, right, this is pretty ugly, right? There's all this stuff all over the place. I'm shopping and there's an ad in the middle for some other thing. GoDaddy, like I'm gonna buy a URL on eBay. There's all this stuff. I don't know where to look. It's kind of a nightmare. I don't know what to click. I can buy it now, but I can add it to cart. Like it's too much. It's awful. So I can easily say to the designer, I think this isn't done yet. Like I think this needs a bit more smoothing, right? Contrast that to Airbnb, right? Look at that. I mean, this makes me want to just like slide down it like a water slide, right? It's got some cool graphics. It automatically gives me options for places that I can stay. It's got beautiful pictures. This is clearly a better design. I mean, it's just objectively a better design. All right, so with design, it's easy to tell. Here's some writing. On the left, we have the Da Vinci Code. The Da Vinci Code is widely regarded as a poorly written novel. It's a good story, but it's not well written. Editors read it, and I think their eyeballs fall out of their head because they think, I can't believe you got away with this. Meanwhile, on the right is The Catcher in the Rye, widely regarded as one of the greatest novels ever written, or in the top 50, right? But look at them, they look exactly the same. It's so easy to just glance at that and be like, oh yeah, that's great, it's done. It's been written, what more do you need from me? But when you really read it, it needs work. So this is another difference between design and writing. And I think I have one more. Yeah, of course, right? People write every day. You write emails, you write SMS, you send something to your mother, you email the plumber who's fixing your house because it's not right. People write every day. But what they're really doing is they're just typing, right? I mean, of course, they're writing in that there's an idea in their head and they're communicating it through written language. But when you think about what we as craftspeople do as writers, it's not the same, right? I mean, how many of you have tried to write that email, that quick email, and you're sitting there 20 minutes later because you're just like, this isn't the right order of these sentences, right? Writing, man, we're writing, they're typing. But I can totally see how non-writers look at that and go, oh yeah, I just wrote this, it's done, right? It's cool, I wrote it, it's fine. You just look at it. Okay, so that's 3 reasons I think why. I'm sure there's many more. but those are the ones I wanted to highlight. Now, let us slide back over to the left here, right? Okay, so I want to talk about designers because I've had this problem in the last couple of weeks with a particular designer. And, I just want to say right off the bat, I love designers. I love design. I love designers. I come from advertising where, we didn't call them designers, we called them art directors, but same thing, right? We work hand in hand. Well, you can't work hand in hand because then how do you hold the mouse? But arm in arm at the desk, creating great things. And it's a true yin yang situation, right? We feed off of each other, or we create off of each other. We fix each other's issues. We give each other, it's fantastic. I love it. But there's this one designer who has been doing this thing, which is driving me fucking nuts, which is I write the text and then she takes it and changes it. Why does she do this, right? Okay, so she is very smart and very good with UX issues, right? She's a trained UX designer. She knows all about user cases. She's great. And she will take a look at my text and she'll be like, I didn't think that was quite right. Or I thought maybe this would be better, right? And that's really bad, right? Because a couple of things happen then. One, I lose trust, right? And yes, exactly. That is the exact right emoji that all your faces are showing that right now. I lose trust. I lose my foundation in the world, right? If she changed that text, maybe she changed other text. Now, when other people like project managers and product owners are coming to me and saying, why did you write it this way? Sometimes I have to say like, I'm not sure that I did. Because sometimes my designer changes stuff, right? Happens to me all the time. Yes, it happens all the time. But I'll tell you, what's even worse than when they change the text is when they change the text and that it's actually good, right? Because now you want to be angry, but you're also like, damn it, that's better than what I had before. And this happened as well too, right? I mean, she's a good designer. She's also a good writer. I mean, but that doesn't make it right, okay? And it doesn't make it any less frustrating, okay? So I think, yes, that doesn't make it okay. And so, we have to get used to this though, because as we discussed earlier, like it's so easy to change the text, right? And it's so hard to change the design. And I think it ends up being like kind of, I call it inherited control, right? So the thing is like writing, as we discussed, writing can be fast, but design is usually a slower, more arduous process, right? And there's a huge difference between writing the text and laying it out. When we write into TextEdit or to a Word file, the layout is kind of automatic, right? I mean, you're probably like me because you're all writers, right? You want to have a good, well-structured outline. But a well-structured outline is relatively easy to do and create and maintain, as opposed to, say, a Figma file where you've got different fonts and different styles and all this stuff all over the place, and it's all going to link up and be properly laid out. And so layouts, mockups, executions take a lot of time. And so designers are often the last ones working on this stuff. And they're doing it in all these complex tools. And I found many times, especially in advertising, like we had a lot of late nights at Young Fun Matt because it was a bit of a factory. And it was almost always the same thing. We would work late until late at the night, and then I would finish the text. And then my art director would be like, okay, well, now it's my turn to like lay it all out and finalize the design. That's another 6 hours or so. So I tried to be a good person. I stayed, right? I support you. I'm here if you need to change anything. Like I can also fiddle with the text flow and the layout, et cetera. But the designers often end up being the last ones working on stuff. And so they inherit this control. And so when it gets down to the wire and they're getting to the end, if text needs to be changed, I think a lot of times it's easier for them to just change it than it is to, call me up, start another meeting, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one of the things that's happening. Another thing that's happening is, of course, that just pushy people often go far in this world, right? That's just something we have to deal with. I've met a lot of pushy people who got to places they didn't deserve to be because they pushed themselves there and said things that were not, like we didn't invade Iraq because it was a good idea. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. Okay. But that's just the way it is, right? So maybe we have to think a little bit about how to deal with this sort of thing, right? So, all right. Oh yeah, and then before we deal that, I just wanted to bring up this one thing. Both my wife and I, we're old enough to have needed to consult a lawyer once or twice in our lives, not for anything bad, but just like, you got a thing you got to deal with, you got a legal document. And every time we have to deal with a lawyer, like when we bought the apartment, right, we had to do a notary. And every time this happens, we go, God damn, these lawyers did it right? Because lawyers have these high, incredibly expensive barriers to entry, right? You can't just stumble into being a lawyer, right? You got to go to law school. You got to enter a professional organization, right? Pass the bar. There's all these old boy clubs, and there's all this incredibly complicated terminology and all these concepts, which, by the way, they all created, right? That's convenient. And so not just anybody can become a lawyer, right? You got to really push through all this stuff to become a lawyer. And then you enter this sort of gilded cage where you can demand high prices, right? Because you're doing this very special thing that only someone like you can do. That's how we value stuff in society a lot of times, right? Meanwhile, in the writer's world, you can just stumble into this. I'm not putting anyone down who may have just stumbled into it. I know how it goes. I stumbled into it as well. But we also, I think, sometimes have this mentality that like, oh yeah, I took a half-day course, so now I know how to do that, right? That's not how it is over in lawyer land or doctor land, right? So yeah, it's a very different kind of setup. And like, we have complex grammar, right? But no one goes to jail for bad grammar, although, they should. But yeah, it's just not the same. And really, like lawyers, doctors, they did this thing that we should probably maybe start it here in this meeting. Like we should consider forming that club so that we can hold ourselves up and demand a higher salary and, maybe push back on these designers a little bit. Yeah, it's just a thought, not necessarily a good thought. Okay. So, all right, what can we do about all this, right? I think about this a lot because it's been kind of a frustrating time with this designer. So I put together a few ideas that are good and a few ideas that are bad, because good ideas are good, bad ideas are fun. So, all right, let us dive in. So one thing we could do is we could make more difficult tools, right? We could create more complex, more difficult to understand tools that you need to read a user manual for to get anywhere, right? Except that I don't think that would actually work, right? Because we've all been dealing with Microsoft Word's bullshit for 25 years. And that hasn't kept anybody away from the writing world, right? This error message. This is Word in the cloud, right? So it's through a Chrome browser. And this says, couldn't save last changes. To avoid losing the highlighted changes, copy and paste them into the document in a new tab. That is the most ridiculous thing to have to tell me to do. I mean, middle finger to you, Microsoft Word, for even suggesting that that's a possibility of something that should be done. Anyway, I don't think I'm missing a laughing emoji. Yes. There's no laughing emoji on there? I guess not. Anyway, thank you for putting that in with the yes, perfect. Yeah, so I don't know that more difficult tools are the answer. I Googled Microsoft Word fail and got 98 million results, right? So, I've made some mistakes in my life, but there's not 98 million people writing pages about it. So, it's some pretty big fuck ups. Yeah, so I think we can agree that making more difficult tools is probably a bad idea. Okay, so that's fine. Let's find something that might be good, right? So, okay, people come to us as writers and they say all that stuff that we were talking about in the beginning, right? Maybe we need to develop some intelligent comebacks, right? These are situations and we should probably have something to say about them. So I have a little grid here, right? So on the left, we have what they say and then what we say. So maybe they're gonna say like, well, I was just fixing a typo, right? Good intentions, but still, right? I think I would say, please let me be responsible for my own mistakes, right? It's so easy to leave a comment in these tools. Just leave a comment. Hey, I think this is a mistake. Just checking. Like, you're the expert, Mr. Writer Man, Mrs. Writer Woman. Like, let me be responsible for that, right? Or something that my designer said, I didn't like the way this was written. Well, isn't that friendly? Tell you what, I'd love to hear your feedback. please leave me a comment and leave the original so I can refer to it, right? That's actually really important, right? I need to see the original so I can understand what your comment means and then think about it. And then how about I changed it because it didn't follow the guidelines? Well, again, that's good intentions, but how am I going to learn, right? So tell me first so I can learn from my mistakes. Leave me a comment, I'll go look it up and I'll fix it. My job. Or just more generally, I changed some text. I hope that's okay. Well, yeah, that doesn't work for me because when you change my text without telling me, it becomes impossible for me to remember who wrote what. And someone will ask me why I wrote something a certain way, and I'll have to tell them, I'm not sure I wrote it at all because my designer writes whatever they want. Yeah. This is all just nice ways to say what we really mean, which is, motherfucker, I would never just go into your Figma file and start fixing shit. Are you out of your mind? That's what we're really thinking, because it's kind of about respect, and it's kind of disrespectful to change somebody's work that way. Yes, exactly. Yes, and instead I would just leave a friendly worded comment like a goddamn adult. Yes. So yeah, these are some friendly and not so friendly ways to respond. I would say that a few intelligent comebacks, maybe that you've worded in your head, maybe without the word motherfucker, is probably a good idea to have, because this is going to happen and it'd be nice to have a nice comeback. Okay. All right. How about a not so good idea, right? So like the lawyers, right? We could bring tools and jargon into the mix, right? We've got our own complex concepts and terminology. So let's alienate some people with jargon, right? So I looked up, there's a bunch of different UX-y tools out there and guidelines to use, right? So one of them is Flesch Kincaid, which many of you have probably heard of. And it's a way of gauging how complex and readable a text is, right? So what I did was I did this exercise on some text that I had written for UBS, where I took the original and it got these results, right? So reading grade level 6.7, reading E-score 57, and reading level 10th to 12th grade, fairly difficult to read, right? So my feedback to that person might be, you, sir, are on the wrong end of Flesch Kincaid. Immediately, they have no idea what I'm talking about. So that's good, right? And then I can throw numbers at them. That's even better, right? So then I redid the text. I just made a few changes, like it wasn't terribly difficult, right? So then we got the reading level down to 8th and 9th grade, right? Plain English, that's better. Yeah. So, it's a little too Moby Dick when all they wanted was green eggs and ham, my friend, right? Because green eggs and ham, I was reading about this. Almost every word in green eggs and ham is one syllable, right? And that's one reason why it scores so well on Flesch Kincaid. So Flesch Kincaid, I know, Flesch Kincaid is one way to just, you can literally just show them the numbers. I'm not saying that's a great idea, but there's a truth to it, a nice truth to it, right? All right. Another thing is this thing I found called the closed test for comprehension, right? And it's very simple. You take sample text, 125 to 250 words, and you remove every fifth word and you replace it with a blank space. And I think that alone is enough, right? Then you're supposed to then ask them to guess what the word they think was removed. And it's a way for them, it's a way to judge if the text is predictable and understandable, right? But I did the exercise online, and you look at a paragraph of text and it's like every fifth word is gone, but then you just fill it in mentally if it's well written, right? Because the flow is there and it's all very logical. But I think it would be great if we could say like, well, I saw what you wrote and nice try, but I took out every fifth word and it sucked, right? So that's not good. You got closed, buddy, right? We can even make up a little term there. So I thought that was interesting. And an interesting test that I might actually use for my own text, which actually feels kind of realistic, right? A lot of people skim, and if they're going to drop words as they skim, it would be interesting if they could still get the meaning. That would be a good test. Another way to go, I found some content analysis heuristics by this guy, Fred Leise. And he has a big list, right? Co-location, differentiation. This is great because he's created all these terms that sound, in many cases, rather scientific, right? So can you imagine saying to somebody who wrote some unfriendly text, the amount of co-location could never make up for the lack of bounded horizons despite multiple access paths. You just snowed that guy. Or you could say, don't let the accessibility fool you. There's no appropriate structure and the currency is completely underwhelming. The more you can make it sound like a wine review, I think the better. Or maybe a little clever, right? I'll tell you what, lack of information sent here really stinks. Ha. So yeah, I think we can say that bringing tools and jargon into the mix is mostly a bad idea when you're a sarcastic asshole like I just was, but that there is some use in there, right? I'm sure that as UX writers, we've all used some of these tools at one point or another, right? Because they are a way to judge text. So maybe use the tools, but keep it to ourselves. Maybe that's my takeaway from that section. All right, another bad idea. Ah, yes, try passive aggression, because we haven't had enough of that thus far. So one way to go here is you can compliment everything but the writing, right? So I mentioned typing earlier, right? So, oh, wow, this is so well typed. You typed the shit out of these words. Huh? That's great. It's some great typing. Every single word is typed. Or you could compliment the font, right? You love the font and the colors. So these are beautiful underlines. Yes, it's great. That's very passive aggressive, right? You could also pick up on the drunken writer trope, right? Writers are drunk. That's what happens, right? We sit and we drink at our typewriter. So you could ask them, how drunk were you when you wrote this? Just checking, just wondering, right? I see you're following in Hemingway's footsteps right into the bar. You could also reference famous writers who aren't that great at the craft, right? So I mentioned Da Vinci Code earlier, right, by Dan Brown. So nice job, Dan Brown. That has the added effect of it sounds like a compliment, but they might not know what you're really saying. Or you could say, wow, this is the 50 Shades of Grey of pharmaceutical brochures, which will really throw them for a loop. Yeah, passive aggressive. It's, you know, if they get nothing out of it, at least you will, right? That it feels good, right? But I think that we could probably agree that it's a bad idea. Maybe keep the passive aggressive comments to yourself or come back to this board and add them here and we will refer to them. All right. But seriously, folks, let's talk a good one, right? So this is obviously the most important one, right? So be better writers. I haven't found anything that trumps this solution. So let me tell you a little bit about what I mean here. So, all right, one thing about being a good writer is that you take ownership, right? You take ownership of these words that we write and you stand up for them. So how do you do this, right? I have this, I don't know, it's kind of a theory or a hypothesis. There are these two groups of people, right? You have to identify who can give you feedback and who can give you direction, right? Feedbackers versus directioners, as I call it. That's maybe not the best term, but it's a lesson that I learned while working at the mighty Jung van Matt. There it is in the Karolinenviertel in Hamburg, looking stout. Jung van Matt was a great place for me to put in my 10,000 hours as a copywriter because it's a place where creatives actually lead. And this happened because it was started by Jean-Remy van Matt and Holger Jung. Jean-Remy is Swiss, as a matter of fact, and he's a writer, and he's a very talented writer. And Holger Jung is his business partner, who is a business guy. And I don't know if they discussed it, but it worked out that Jean-Remy led the show and Holger did the accounting. Essentially, I'm minimizing what he did. Of course, he did a lot of great stuff, but Jean-Remy and the writers and the creatives had the lead, right? So as a copywriter at JVM, I figured out that I need to listen to the account planners, right? But I have to do what my creative director says, right? Feedbackers versus decision makers, directioners, sorry. Feedbackers versus decisioners, directioners. It's not working. I have to change that term. Anyway. Yeah, account planners give feedback. They have a lot of interesting ideas. They're working with the client. They know what's going on. I need to hear their feedback, but I don't necessarily have to act on it. I get to choose what of their feedback I take and I put back into the copy and which part I ignore. My creative director, on the other hand, that person is setting the direction of what we're doing. So that's feedback that I have to take seriously and deal with every single time, right? So as an exercise, when you go back to work tomorrow, whether you actually go into the office or just sit at your desk at home, look around you and ask yourself, who are the feedbackers and who are the directioners, right? And think about acting accordingly, right? You can even preface things by saying, I would love to get your feedback. I mean, that's a subtle way to say, I'm interested in what you want to say, but I'm not necessarily going to do everything that you say. Yeah, think about that, because there are these structures, whether they've been discussed or not, wherever you're working. Okay. One other thing, right? Part of being a good writer, right, is to write gooder, faster. Haha, see what I did there? Going back to text edit and the tools and writing fast. Over my time, in my time as a freelancer, I got closer and closer to the clients. I moved out of agencies and I moved closer and closer to clients. And I found myself sitting at the table with a lot of clients, just writing right in front of them. And this was a tremendously good exercise because as I got faster, I was able to solve their problems instantly, right? They would tell me what they're thinking. I would say, how about this? And they would be like, wow, that's great. This takes the downside of those tools and turns it into an advantage, right? The better you can get at writing fast, the better your experience as a writer will be, because it takes all of the nonsense out of the equation. You just do it right now. Here it is. They love it. And then you can take it and revise it as necessary. But what it does is it leads to these magical moments, right? The magical moment is when somebody asks you to write something and you write it and they look at it and go, holy shit, I could never have done this myself. And that moment is how you get people to stop fucking up your text because they know I got to give it to this writer person because they can take care of this. They own this. They know how to do this. They know what they're doing. And if you haven't been a passive aggressive asshole, they'll even know that they could give you feedback and you won't be rude about it. So yeah, be a better writer, get to that magical moment. And that is the end of my talk. I want to thank you all for listening to me, rant and rave. Thank you for ranting with me. And yeah, I'm happy to discuss. I'll take a sip of water.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I'm just going through the comments here. And yeah, I'm hearing a lot of what a delightful rant, and I'm just having the time of my life, and no questions, just really enjoying myself. So I think that's just general feeling from the crowd here, just to feedback to you here, because
that's perfect.
Sometimes didn't quite make it in these virtual events, does it? The feedback from the crowd. Yeah, so in terms of questions, I mean, FYI for the audience, this is now the time where the floor is open. So feel free to also turn on your camera, your mic, or use the chat, and we'll cite your questions to you, Daniel. I have one question that kind of goes with your last slide here, the last post-it, the magical moment. I feel like that was the magical moment of this talk as well. Do you have any magic moment stories from your day-to-day? Something that pops up and you reference or you come back to when some of these bad experiences with designers pop up again?
That's a very good question. And of course, I should have a specific example. I don't, okay, so I can't think of a specific example, except that I can remember. So, and this is something I probably should have included in the talk, right? That designer who I was having trouble with, that was towards the beginning of the project. Towards the end, she said to me, you should really write a book. Because I'm a good writer, not because I have some horrible story to tell. But yeah, I was able to turn her around in that way. So yeah, that was a pretty magical moment that happened in the last couple of weeks. She said, wow, you are one of the best 2 writers I've ever worked with. And now I really want to know who that other person is, She didn't say. I need to follow up with her. Maybe we get in a room together.
Your wife, Daniel, probably.
Well, that would be, yeah. I mean, there's this girl named Carolyn. She has the same last name as you. Yeah. But yeah, I had a bunch of moments like that as a freelancer because I did this thing called high-speed branding. Because I kept getting these clients who would come to me and say, please, rewrite my website, rewrite this brochure, whatever. And I would say, who are you? What do you care about? What do you talk about? What are we saying? And they would be like, I don't know, because they had no content strategy, they had no brand strategy. So I did high-speed branding sessions to do branding really fast. And so it was a 4-hour session face-to-face with whoever was in charge of this. And it always took an hour and a half to get to the first magical moment where it would, because it's struggle, struggle, struggle. And then finally, yes, that sentence is totally me or totally my company. And then you have this thing that you can pivot everything else around, which is really great. And it's something that I try to keep in mind anytime I'm writing and I'm struggling, because I think if you look back on your writing career, you can always see these moments where you can always find the moments where you struggled a lot, but then you found that one thing that then unlocked the floodgates. Unlock the floodgates, broke the floodgates, open the floodgates, open the floodgates.
Open, yeah.
Yes, to everything else. And then it all just started to make sense and it kind of started to write itself. And that's part of the magical moment as well. And of course, it's nice to get the compliment from the person sitting across the table who says, "Oh my God, that's perfect." Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess it has to do with like getting into the flow as well, or getting to know the client, or like the voice that you're writing for, basically. And then
yes, and doing it wrong 10 or 15 or 20
yeah.
times, right? And there again, like that's another thing that I just love about writing is you can instantly prototype. How about this? No. Okay, how about this? No. And it doesn't feel like you're wasting time. It feels like you're, shooting down bottles at the shooting range or something.
True. So in terms of doing things wrong, I have another question here about content critiques. Have you done those before, like in terms of collaborating with other with interdisciplinary people from other different disciplines, designers, for example? Have you done those, and do you think they're a good idea to get to that magical moment?
Yes, I think that the way that you set that up, yes, because what that does is it reinforces this idea that let's have the experts do the thing that they're experts at. And a content critique would seem to imply like, we wrote a bunch of stuff and now we want you to look at it and, give us feedback, give us rewrites, etc. Take some ownership of it. But it also, I guess it could also be a sign of a more fundamental problem, which a lot of big companies have, which is there's not enough writers. So all the non-writers have to do the writing, and then the writers come in to do the editing. So that's not good. But I don't know, what's the solution, right? Well, let's just hire 100 more writers, that's probably not so likely. So the reality that I think we face is the way forward is to probably train everybody to be slightly better writers, and to then, do content critiques where we as experts can step in and fix and rewrite and reformulate, set up guidelines, help other people become better writers, and so on. I have done critiques and find that, the best way to do it is to always just have the original there, preferably screenshots of, say, the website or the screens, and then just start underlining and creating notes. And then also, if you can write fast, immediately put examples of how you would fix it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to talk about how things could be different in theory, but you have to see it on the page on pixels.
Prototyping within the content.
I find often I will think to myself, like, we're spending, in a meeting or whatever, like we're spending too much time talking about what the words or the idea could be. We need to actually write it down, because it's not real until it's down on paper or pixels.
Agreed. Yeah. I think that helps, definitely. We have a question here from Rebecca. She's wondering, what do we do about editors that make changes that we don't agree with? And on a similar note, I'm sorry, I now forgot who asked this questions, but there was a second question. How do you deal with other writers who change your work without letting you know why? The quality of the rewrite can either improve or make it worse. So basically, what do we do about other editors that make changes that we agree with or don't agree with? Like,
yeah, that's a good it's a good point. Of course, it's not always designers who is changing our writing, right? Sometimes it's writers and editors. To me, it's a culture thing, right? Sometimes the culture, like the culture at Jung von Matt was the creator owns the creation and everybody else gives feedback, but it's the creator's job to change that. And then I've worked in many places where, yeah, the writer just comes in and changes it, the editor comes in and changes it. I think I would encourage you then to push back. I mean, within the boundaries of the company culture, right? I mean, if that's just how it's going to be, I'm not sure what to tell you. But I don't think there's anything wrong in saying, as we had these examples earlier, right? Like, if you just change it, I'll never learn. If you just change it, I can't keep track of it. If you change it without discussing it, that feels disrespectful to me. I don't think any of those three things, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying any of those three things. And, you know, it's sometimes it feels like talking to children, like, you know, how would you like it if I went into your writing and changed your stuff? I don't know. I would say those three things are good things to say. And I would try to find ways to foster a culture where it's like, keep your fingers out of my writing. Yeah. Let's talk about it and let me own it, because that's how creativity really works, right? I mean, people talk about, say, like creativity through democracy. I don't think that really works, right? Like George Lucas didn't democracy his way to Star Wars, right? He had a vision, he hired people to help him execute on that vision, but he was the one who made the decisions. And the reality is that's how creativity works in its best. But yeah, on when is saying always explain my assumptions or hypothesis when it comes to feedback. Absolutely right. Like, what you want to be able to do is to say, here's what I was thinking, and here's why I did this, because that also gives them the opportunity to say, oh, actually, that's wrong. You know, like you got briefed incorrectly or you had the wrong facts. That's fine too. That happens all the time. But yeah, one thing my wife has told me is like, one thing she feels like she needs to do is every time she writes something, she also needs to write in a second column why she wrote that. Yeah. Why she wrote it that way. And I think that's really interesting, because it's actually really cumbersome to have to explain every single sentence that you wrote with a sentence or two. Mm-hmm. But of course, you can see how that helps, right? Because we're not just working on one document and then we work on the next document, we're working on 10 different things at once. And how does it feel when somebody says, why did you write it that way? And you're just like, I don't know. I'm not sure what I was thinking there. You know, that's not a very strong position. So yeah, find ways to explain your assumptions and hypotheses. That will always help when it comes to giving feedback and pushing back on the changing.
Absolutely. So we have another question here from Emiliano asking, what do you suggest as like a means of promoting awareness of your role as a writer when you are the only team member with that role? Do you have any tips there?
Yeah, that's something I am currently struggling with in my job. Honestly, the only thing that I think there's two schools of thought here. One is you stand up and you tell everybody how it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And the other is you focus on doing it really well so that people say, oh, that's really how it should be, huh? Right? It's that magical moment thing again.
Absolutely.
And in a company of, I think we have 70,000 employees, you think like, gee whiz, if I only convert one person a day, it's going to take me, 800 years to get everybody convinced. But I think that, you'll gain momentum as you gain stature. Yeah, it's a tough position to be in, because if the culture doesn't allow for writers to own writing, or for writers to even do the writing, it's difficult to change that. It's just really, really difficult. So I would say one thing to do is to look around you, like who's in your immediate space, right? Is there a designer that you can get on your side, right? I've had these magical moments with a lot of designers where they don't really care much about the text, and then you do it really well and they go, oh, I see. Now I see why this is important and why I, the designer, shouldn't be doing it. That I think tends to snowball in a way. Yeah. right? And if you can kind of snowball your way out into the organization, that really helps. And you can also try standing up and saying, guys, this is how we should be doing this. But I haven't seen that work. Not really. I mean, if you can say that, if you can pitch that to people who are in charge and who set the culture, okay, then you're getting somewhere. But yeah, I guess that's the two ways to change culture, right? From the top and from the bottom. And yeah, the bottom you can do every day, and the top takes a lot of effort.
So just as an FYI here for everyone, feel free to chip in if you'd like to, like I'm just reading down the comments or the questions from the comments. So feel free to raise your hand or just chip in if you'd like to. But if nobody has any audio feedback to give here, I also have another question from Anguin. I think I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. But the question was, how do you align on some sort of criteria for final decisions, as feedback on any piece of content is pretty much a cultural bias? So how do you align on criteria for on feedback? Do you have any?
Yeah,
there?
so that's a good question, and that's a tough one, because the first question is always, are there any guidelines or criteria? And in so many companies, there are not, because they haven't taken writing that seriously, or they just haven't had the writers to do it, or everybody thought they could just do the writing themselves. Yeah, it's very difficult to stand up and say this is incorrect, and then not have any sort of rule set or reasoning that you can back yourself up with. So then it becomes about guideline writing and pushing people, either yourself or people around you, to make decisions about how we're going to do this sort of thing, whether it's headlines or formatting or terminology use, tone of voice documents, guideline documents, information architectures, vocabulary, term definitions. These are all really important building blocks to a functional writing department, right? Because it gives you that set of rules that, in theory, we've all agreed on it. Like you all approved this, and this is how we do it. And that is it's an important foundation that takes a long time to build. And so I would say that part of being a UX writer is building those guidelines. It doesn't have to be super formal, but I've found that even on smaller assignments, if you can deliver, the document with the writing, but also that list of guidelines, like I use this term, it's what we said earlier, right? About justifying what you've done or talking about your assumptions or hypotheses, right? I use this term and here's why. And I decided to talk about this like this, and this is how we're going to do this for everything we write in this area. That's quite powerful. And you can also have that magical moment with these sort of guidelines, and when people start to say like, oh, we should define other things, and it's something, take inspiration from designers. I think designers have really done this well with design systems, like insisting on, uniform colors, uniform structures, uniform illustrations, etc., because it makes their life easier and it makes everybody's life easier. Everything goes faster when you have building pieces to put together. And with writing, it's not so much building blocks. It's more about bringing in the barriers a little bit, right? And we've already defined that we use this word and we say it like this and so on and so forth. So yeah, common terminology, common phrases, lots of examples. Guidelines are really important, but it takes work to create them.
Speaking of, it takes work to create, I think the last question for today is how to go with your move into your new house built.
Well, thank you for asking. We moved on the 16th of December, right? So we were the family carrying our Christmas tree up the sidewalk, which was it was pretty stressful. We moved in December 16th. It's currently March 22nd, and like just last week, my wife and I started to say things like, I feel like I can finally lay on the couch and relax, you know, like it
Um,
was with the renovation and the buying of the house, it was really a traumatic experience. And it has taken some time to recover. Yeah.
I can imagine. And
Yeah.
I'm very glad to hear that, yeah, that period has come to an end and you guys can now
Yes.
do something such as giving talks at UX writing and content design meetups.
Yes. I am also glad. This is much more fun than moving and renovating. And I should also next time I'll include a picture of how it ended up. It's really nice. It's got a floor now and there's white walls and the whole kitchen. It's great. It's really very pretty, very simple and clean and nice.
Well, congrats on building a house and on
Thank you.
here within UX writing.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think, yeah, unless anyone wants to pitch in here. Then I would call this the end of the official part of this meetup. And I think I speak for everyone when I say, thank you so, so much, Daniel, for this amazing talk. It's been a ride to go through your board with you in a positive ride. So thank you so much for taking the time to, yeah, putting all these thoughts into actual words and putting it into a talk. I think, yeah, we can, most of us, or maybe even all of us can absolutely relate with what you've presented.
Yes.
So
thank you. Thank you all. You're a very lovely audience. And yeah, I'll see you out there in the writing world.